The professor here. Welcome, everyone. Today, I want to really talk to those of you who are just starting to consider getting registered. Maybe you're early in your career, just out of tech school, just out of university. Maybe you've been practicing for a while and you want to see about getting registered. So this video is going to be our first video in under our regulatory topic that we talked about. Was brought up after a discussion with a student of mine just a couple weeks ago. This past semester, I had the opportunity to begin teaching at ASU's College of Architecture program, where I got to bring my classroom, my experience to the classroom and teach. And several of the students had taken a very unique understanding to my experience. And I found out that a lot of the educators, both in the tech schools, the community colleges, and even in the universities, they are not familiar with these requirements of registration or everything. And so they tend not to be able to give the best advice to these people who are looking at embarking on their registration processes. So this video is for that today, to discuss it. First of all, I need to always tell you this is only going to be a guide generally. Always check with the state agencies. We need to understand that registration of architecture and possibly interior design is always regulated by the state in the United States. The state has exclusive regulatory rights over it. It may or may not include allowing interior design registration. Like in Arizona, we do not have registration for interior designers or a separate registration for them. You may also see in some states a board of architecture versus, like in Arizona, a technical board that not only oversees registration of the architects, but also engineers, geologists, and many other technical areas. With that being said now, I want to come across the first bridge, and that is your first state of registration is referred to as your base state. This is a very important state to have. You want to make sure that once you gain that base state, you keep that one intact at all times. Don't let it go out of enforcement. Don't go inactive, because that particular base state could have a domino effect on any other registration you have. So you always want to be very, very careful about that base state. Many states don't require you to be resident to obtain registration there. And as a result, you always want to try to select the state that's easiest to get registered, the ones with the fewest hurdles to cross, so you can get registered the easiest. Typically, I remember early in my career, California was one, not because it was necessarily the easiest, but it did have a treatise that you had to write as part of the registration process on the seismic and lateral requirements. And the beautiful thing about that particular paper, once you obtained your California, that was seen as one of the more stringent states, so most other states would reciprocate it relatively easy. Arizona is a state that is known pretty much universally as one of the easiest states to get registered, so certainly consideration there. Now, as we talk about this, we need to understand that we're going to hear a few other terms, and I don't want us to get confused. These are professional entities, not regulators, not registration entities. The American Institute of Architects, AIA, is a trade organization. It is basically a large country club. In my background, they have a lobbying interest at the national level. At least in Arizona, a lot more marginal in their lobbying effects here. They sit on creating documents, the AIA documents, which are nationally recognized as some of the finest documents in the world. Contractor, owner, architect. It's a whole series of documents that are very, very good. Yes, you will be needing to know those because it is going to be part of the testing, but we'll address testing in a minute. The other organization you want to listen to is the National Council of Architectural Registration Boards. That's NCRB. Most all states and territories of the U.S. are members of NCRB. So once you get appointed to that board, you become an NCRB member, at least during the tenure that you're on the board. NCRB, they set testing standards. They have the Intern Development Program, IDP, which we'll address in a few moments here. They're ones who will recognize the validity of a degree when it comes to their gaining their certification. And their certification is very important for reciprocation. Most degrees, most of the degrees that they recognize is from the National Architectural Accreditation Board, NAAB. You always want to make sure that the college that you're picking, the university you go to, are part of an NAAB. Certainly, whatever you do, you want to make sure is recognized by NCRB. Also, NCRB sets down testing requirements. It used to be when I started, once passed, always passed. So if you passed the part, it was always a pass part no matter what. But then early during my registration process, they changed it to a 5-year maximum. Once you start, you had 5 years to pass. If you didn't get past, then you had to start over. Back then, it was also a lot of human grading. Now, with the newer processes that came into play late in my registration process, it's all computer graded tests. I prefer that. It tends to take the human input out of it. NCRB's biggest thing, as I said a moment ago, was the blue file. That blue file is very, very important for reciprocity. If you want to cross over your registration to other states, that blue file in most of the states in the union, it makes it a simple deal. You refer a letter or a form to NCRB and say, I want to take my registration from this state and reciprocate to that one. Usually goes very, very quick and easy. Understand NCRB doesn't do the registration. They only facilitate the paperwork. But again, many states in the union, once you have a blue file passed on, it becomes very easy. Understand, though, still all the regulation for the practice for getting your registration still resides at the state, and it may still vary. Again, always be in contact with your state. Now, generally speaking, there are three main components to gaining your registration in most states in the U.S. These now may be accomplished in parallel, not in series, but verify with the state agency that you're seeking the registration in. When I first started, it had to be done in series. You had to have your education, you had to have your experience, then you had to take the test, and you had to follow in those lines regardless. Today, most all states, including Arizona, allows you to run them simultaneously. In other words, you can gain your education and experience parallel to each other, testing, and then once you complete all three phases, then they will grant the registration. That works very well, in particular for most of us who are trying to shorten up the time frames. It does seem to help to some degree. Now, we're going to talk about those three components right now. I'm going to begin with the experience, and the reason why I began with the experience is some states like Arizona, and I believe maybe 9 other states or 8 other states, they don't require any sort of a degree, so they see experience as a totality of space. Whether you take some college, whether you take all experience, and they'll say, for instance, they'll say you'll have to have 8 years out of the last 10 to become eligible for the experience/education component of their requirements. Education is only a part of it, and even under most states where they recognize education and experience as two separate elements, there's a still maximum, and in most of those states, 5 years is about the limit of the education. So, of the 8 years, as a general rule, only 5 will be considered education. Then you'll need 3 additional years beyond that. Experience beyond the education is usually required in that range of about 3 years. If you do have the education, that work must be under a registrant, whether you take the whole period of experience as an apprenticeship program, or you go through the college degree process. You must work under a registrant within the discipline that you're working on. Now, like in Arizona, because we have a multidiscipline board, you could work for other disciplines, in particular an engineer of some sort, but that would only count one half. In other words, if you spend a year with an engineer, it would count 6 months towards that. So you always want to be very careful as you look where you take the jobs and how you work. All states now require the NCRB IDP program, the Intern Development Program. This is where maybe a lot of confusion, especially from the college students and university students that I've been teaching, they get confused because sometimes there's a component in the education that they do an internship, and yet they think of this. I want to think about this component, and I think the best way for us to think about, as in a less confusing way, is using an old term that was around many eons ago when architecture was practiced before it came in such a rigid practice that we see today, and would be termed an apprenticeship, not an internship. And so that apprenticeship would be that experience that would be counted towards your experience going on, not the internship that you would do as part of an educational process. The experience under a registrant is completed. It has to be completed after school. When you're in your degree program, the state may or may not accept it. So please be aware and check with that. In other words, if you work for an architect or an engineering firm during your summer break, that may or may not count towards that those years of experience. And especially if they have an IDP requirement. I believe NCRB's IDP has a 3-year max for it, so we've got to be very careful. Always check with the state regulatory agency, as to what those are. Some states view the education experience as continuous in single, like I said, and that's why you need to be aware. Yes, we see them as separate things, education and experience, but in its overall view, they are seen as continuous. It is not a bad practice, and I did this in Arizona, to get to know the state agency's licensing manager, the person who's in charge of taking those applications. Consult that manager. I had a very good relationship with the licensing manager here at the Arizona Board of Technical Registration, and every time I went to get a job, I had a lot of opportunities with her to say, hey, is this going to count? Is this going to be a problem towards it? And it really mainstreamed and allowed me to gather my 8 years of experience relatively quickly. I actually complete my 8 years in 8 years, not within 10 as many times, because I was very diligent about that. So that won't be a bad thing to have. Now, if you choose the path of education, you always want to verify that the condition of the institution's status and accreditation, and you want to recheck as you go through your education program, because it's possible that while you're in the middle of your education, that institution loses accreditation, and then that becomes a hitching point or a problem. In fact, it might even put you into a position where you go through all that time and money of getting that degree, and NCRB and the state will not accept it because of that. So you always want to watch that. It's always nice to verify, not just with the state, but NCRB, even with NAAB. They have a website you can check. Always be sure about that. If you're going to study abroad, check with your state agency as well as NCRB so you do not lose time towards registration. If you spend 2 years, even in a college or a university program in another country, it's possible all that time will not count towards anything towards your registration. You want to be very careful about that. Always be aware. I'm not saying not do it. I'm just saying whatever you do, make sure you know what the implications are. The goal is to try to, once you get your education completed and you're ready to begin, to get that registration as soon as possible so you can start practicing, because up until then, you're really not going to be the professional that you want to be. You're not going to be able to claim to be the architect that you want to be because state law won't allow it. Always be sure that to differentiate the internships during your college studies. That's one of the reasons why I talk about the experience in the IDP program of NCRBs. Really should be called an apprenticeship program, because a lot of the students, especially this past semester when I was at ASU, they didn't understand that. They sat there and said, well, we're doing our internship. Well, that internship doesn't count towards your registration, and the state's going to be very particular about that potentially. Some states are a little lax than others. That's why you always want to check with the state, make sure you know what you've got. Be sure that NCRB will allow you to create a blue file. If you don't, you'll fall into condition like with me. I didn't have a degree. For many years, NCRB wouldn't even accept me. About 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, they introduced the BEA program, the Broadly Experienced Architect program, but it cost $15,000 to get that blue file. And unless you're going to really register in a lot of states, it may or may not be worth your time or the money to do that. So you understand, I am registered in Arizona. I have had, although they're expired, registrations in both Colorado and Texas. I did apply, although I never completed my California. Again, I decided to keep my practice here exclusively in Arizona, so there was no need for it. So NCRB played very little part in my 44-year career so far. And as I'm entering the end of my career right now, and I'm continuing the teaching, doing these type of videos to help bring up the next generations of architects, is going to, I think, not play as much a role either. Now, let's go on to the testing part, the Architectural Registration Exam, or the ARE. When I first started, right now, if you take it according to the NCRB website that I just looked at a few moments ago, that test is now 6 divisions. They're all computer graded, and they cover a whole variety. Let me tell you a little history of that. Way back just before I started, and I took my first parts of the exam way back in 1983 for the first time. Way back just prior to that, starting I think in 82, 81 was the last year, they had 2 4-part exams. They had what they called the AIT, or the in-training test that was given in June, and then in December they had another 4-part exam for the professional. You would have to pass both those 4 parts exams. You would be eligible after you had 5 years of experience in Arizona to take the first half. After 3 more years, have a total of 8. Then they allowed you to take that. That was that serial approach to the registration. Then in 1982, 83, they went to 1 9-part exam. Again, both the 2 4-part exams and that 1 9-part exam did have one component. It was in the December exam, or the professional exam, of the 2 4-parts, or in the last day of the 9-part exam, which took place once a year for the entire week. It was Thursday. It's a 12-hour design exam where they gave you a program and you had to design a site plan, first floor plan, a second floor plan, 4 elevations, and a section. You had to develop all that in 12 hours. And that was always a very grueling exam. It was an exam no one really looked forward to. And now, of course, we're all 6-part, one exam, all computer graded. It's really much more favorable to not absolutely taking everything out of you. I know a lot of people who started with the registration process who fell out just because the registration exam was such a rigorous exam. No matter what, you still have to pass all parts before you register. So once you complete all 3 things, the experience/education component, which you can do in series now, as well as the taking the test, which as soon as you're out of school, you can start taking that test. I would recommend it. The ARE is very much geared to those of you who just graduated college. Take it while you've gotten out of college relatively soon. It'll be easier for you to pass. And even if you get it done on your first try, all you have to do is complete the last 3 years of experience to get your seal. It would be very, very beneficial for you to do that and not have to dink around. With the computer test now, you don't have to take it during a certain time of the year like it did when I took it. You can take one part now, you can take another part in a couple months, and you keep going. I believe they still have a requirement that if you fail, you have to wait 6 months before you retake that. And again, they still have the 5-year limit, but it's still much more favorable to do it than when, like for me, you took a whole week out and you took 39 hours of testing Monday through Thursday, that 1 week in June. And it was sometimes really horrible. I mean, I have a buddy, he and I still talk about it to this day when we took it together. One year, it used to be done at the Moose Lodge here in Phoenix, and one year there were 300 of us in the room, and the air conditioning went out, and we spent the weekend sweating our asses off while we took the test. That stuff doesn't happen today, so it's really much more favorable. It's better for you, for those of you who are taking it now. Whatever you can do, if you can follow a path that will allow you to preserve that NCRB blue file, that is very, very important, so that you can reciprocate your registration to other states easily and without inhibition and without barrier. Those of us who don't have it, we have to make a choice not to practice in those states, or we go work for someone who is registered in those states. It's not impossible, but it still, takes you back from where you want to be. I hope that this was a nice, brief outline on how to get registered, on those earliest steps to get registered. If you liked what you see, be sure to subscribe and watch future videos. This is a new channel. It is one that I want to see that will augment my teaching capabilities, but more importantly, hopefully it'll help bring a whole new generation of architects up to the front. So please hit the like button down below, hit the subscribe, and stay tuned. And thank you for your time.